Hello, everyone. Welcome to the October 17th meeting, Cloud Custodian Community Meeting. We've got a few people already here with some pre-game discussion on some issues that have been open. We've got the agenda, the meeting notes pasted in the channel, into the recording. We've got a few different topics. I don't know where is best to start. I think we had some discussion in GitHub and Slack and all that on this Bodo and the S3 memory leak stuff. Kapil, you want to start there?
Sure. Bodo. So the two are somewhat connected, although they're not directly. So in general, early on in Custodian's history, there was very unclear documentation about the thread safety of clients or client construction. And so when we use a thread pool for additional IO capacity, we would construct the client potentially inside of the thread pool. That has now been clear in retrospect that client construction is not thread safe, but clients themselves are thread safe. And so we try to walk back most of that. There's one place on the memory side where it does appear that there's some client leakage there. And we've got a standalone reproducing script as well as some detailed analysis in this issue. The patch here is to effectively do that for S3, which is one of the places that didn't get hit, and potentially go do an audit on the full code base. S3 is a little bit weird because we have to construct a separate client based on the buckets region, which is sort of in line to that. But part of that was I was going to take a tool like Memory and go explore this script to see where the exact leakage is. But I know we've had some prior comments in issues that are mostly stale and old with regards to memory increases as they upgraded their custodian version. And the suspect was always that because we're doing frozen releases, that it was due to a update of Bodo itself. So this is an active area of exploration for us to see if we can reduce memory usage here and potentially go audit on the code base for client construction outside of the main thread. This particular gist is really just about the fact that it was, to me, a slightly surprising result of just using a lock around client construction inside of the thread pools would actually decrease memory usage, which is somewhat odd by itself. So wanted to go investigate that to understand it fully.
Yeah, it does seem a little bit weird, but I guess, so you're saying that because those clients should be thread safe, we should be able to create them on the main thread and then pass them in to all the workers and not have to, lock or not, we're not going to be constructing them inside those worker threads.
Yeah, so we've generally switched out from the old pattern to that new pattern, and old and new, like a couple years ago. There are definitely places that's possible that that's the case where we still have the old pattern, and S3 is definitely one of those. So unfortunately, S3 also has the additional challenge of needing to do an additional API call just to discover the bucket region. So it might be in line for some additional refactoring. As part of that refactoring, there's also a separate use case around, this is around S3 bucket documentation, to also be able to specify what augments you actually want to enable for a given policy, because otherwise the default will result in additional S3 API calls, which can cause some additional cost consideration per se as well. as well as CloudTrail and downstream GuardDuty, et cetera.
Sounds good.
Now, that's not directly related to the other agenda topic that's right above this one in that list, but Pratyush, I think you identified that there's a degree of S3 port exhaustion for a long-running set of policies going on a compute instance, this is mostly because the Boto clients themselves are tracking a URL lib3 pool, and that pool requires an explicit call invocation of the close method to clear out those connections. And that pool also consumes some degree of memory as well. There's a notion here that we, out of our session factory, return back a session facade that that's able to track the client construction. So effectively, we'll take a step back. What do we want to get to? We want to get to effectively the end of a policy execution should be garbage collecting the full underlying URL lib connections, URL lib 3 pools, and that requires calling and close on all those. So potentially we add a facade here that will track those client creations so that we can go clean it up. We typically have sessions for credential assumption in a thread local to minimize the credential assumes, but if we also tacked on a facade there that track client construction, we could also clean those up at the end of policy execution. We go to reset the thread local.
Got it. Is this only applicable to S3 client creation or all?
No, this would be to all.
Oh,
sorry.
Got it. Okay.
The previous one was specific, the PR was specific to S3, and it's a slightly different issue.
Yes.
It's this notion of making sure that we only create clients in the main thread. This is a little bit more specific to making sure that we call close on all clients ever constructed.
Got it. Yeah, I think we did experiment increasing the port ranges because the default is something from 32,000 to 60,000, which gives something around 29,000 ports available. We try to increase it, and the default keep alive time, we try to reduce it. And right now we are not running out of our primary region, which is US East 1. So I'm not sure. I'm not seeing any more errors once those fixes got applied, but we are running out of a secondary region, and I want to make sure once we fail back over to our primary region, I can validate those changes and report back.
Yeah, I mean, the region shouldn't affect, like, the Linux OS configuration, kernel configuration here is the correct way to address this at the moment, in terms of, like, what is it? Like linger options on the TCP connection, and setting up those will allow for cleaning this out more quickly on a faster basis, but at least at the OS level. So this is an OS level. Max number of ports is effectively 65K, some degree of usage. There will exhaust ports, especially if we're not releasing on the client connections. Setting the OS setting to effectively clean out on idle connections, and linger option will decrease that. But at the same time, like, we should look at cleaning up after ourselves. Let's say,
Yep.
For policy execution. So still all good to
Got it.
and appreciate the detailed bug report.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the explanation. I think I can take a deeper look and see if I can take a stab at it. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks. All right. Yeah. So we're kind of running bottom to top here on some of the discussion, which that's okay. So one of the other topics I know that came up in a few different PRs and issue reports was just supporting newer Python runtimes, which is a bit of a fuzzy topic because different people mean it in different spots, whether it's for provision policy Lambda functions or in as a default for the C7 and mailer Lambda function. But in any of these, I think we're looking to like 3.11. I think Kapil, there was some discussion around maybe supporting 3.11 as supporting moving the default runtime for policy lambdas from 3.9 to 3.11. And it sounded like you were just had a bit of a concern that we wanted to keep whatever Python version we're using to run the policies, like the local version.
Yeah, I don't know. Like what I'm trying to do is preserve the fact that we may have extensions against core, and you know, to do that correctly. And so what we did for like the ARM support that Patricia added was that we default to the version that we're running because we already have everything installed at that point. And currently we copy all of that into, we assembled the Lambda archive directly from what's on local disk. And if the OS, if the architecture or the Python version are different, then we are not going to be able to deal with native extensions. So currently we don't particularly care on the Python version semantic. Like we will just upload to, whatever the user specifies or the default for the default for the policy. But in terms of looking at trying to be more correct here and wanting to support future editions of Python extensions that might be binaries, we should generally try to default to what the user already has, with the exception of the Lambda runtime not supporting it and then falling back.
Yeah, that does seem kind of tricky to keep. I mean, and I know we could do something like if we want to target a specific runtime, we could pull in like Docker Lambda, like those Lambda CI images or something. But that's
the direct down,
a lot more.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's doable. It is a little bit involved. I mean, theoretically, it could depend on like Poetry Core, but that's I mean, I'd rather try to keep it like what's the simplest correct thing we can do. And pip doesn't have a public interface, so we added support for 3.11 being explicitly user configured, and we wouldn't stop people from manually picking things, but I think we still want to preserve our ability to say, hey, there's a Jamie-ass Python extension in Rust, and it's got a significant performance improvement. Like, we want to go enable that, like, and not being blocked because that's not the correct default that we have right now.
Yeah, I mean, your comment about the architecture too. So if you're on an AMD 64 architecture locally and you're trying to deploy an ARM Lambda function like that, we run into the same issue, right?
Right, but we default to the OS that the architecture you're already on.
Oh, we are doing, okay.
If you're on ARM, you deploy ARM Lambdas. If you're on x86, you deploy,
okay, so we're doing that.
Before Lambdas, like that's the default there. I feel like we should do that for Python as well.
I can see that. Okay, that makes sense. And then, all right, because if you've already installed things locally, you're right, then it's a lot easier to do that than have to take on some Docker dependency or something.
I mean, you've already installed locally. You already have the dependencies locally that match your Lambda environment. Assuming, of course, then we go into the OS level stuff. So, I mean, it's not 100% there yet either. Not consideration. I mean, I think the real consideration is whether or not we want to publish Lambda layers. Like that's another consideration or direction we could go is let's just have custodian reference Lambda layers, but then that creates a central point of potential failure, and then we would need to have the ability for environments to be able to create their own. So different considerations, but
yeah, that's fair. Okay. I do remember we had some layer discussions a while back. I don't remember where those ended.
those were more about
Yeah.
auto layering. But this is
Oh, okay.
like if we actually wanted to support native architecture, wanted to support and the auto layering is not a whole lot different than what we're doing today in terms of auto publishing or auto assembling the Lambda archive, just doing it with an extra layer, with an extra layer. And the consideration around native archives, though, gets into how do we get into OS and machine level architecture deltas that, because if I'm on Windows or if I'm on Mac, I'm not going to be able to publish. None of the things that we do today would necessarily work as soon as we assume a C extension, Python, CPython native extension. In that context, we would need to, I think, potentially look at publishing a Lambda layer that could be referenced or directly published, created by the user.
All right. So trade-offs, concerns, we'll come back to more of that. But for right now, I mean, 3.11 is in there as a valid runtime, so people can opt into that, but the default is still 3.9. Right, that's where we left off. Yeah. All right. And hey, it looks like Kapil dropped and came back in. That's cool. The other thing we had here was on we've got a couple reports about this this trusted advisor check. Some of you on this call may have already hit this. It looks like what happened behind the scenes is that AWS added a new trusted advisor check for Lambda code storage, and it isn't actually documented anywhere yet, and it automatically refreshes. So when someone tries to run a policy with this service limit, an account service limit policy, it will try to target this. It'll pull in either explicitly or implicitly. It may try to check this Lambda code storage usage and refresh it. And because it's a new automatically refreshing check, we get an error. And it seems like the way that we should handle that is just expect. I mean, the documentation all says that we should expect this, that error can just come up sometimes. We should try to point people to service quotas when they're relevant, but gracefully handle this case where we try to refresh a check that we can't for one reason or another, whether it's auto refreshing or whatever other reason. So we do have someone open to PR, which I'm glad for because I can't see this stuff right now, the trusted advisor details. So we have somebody working through trying to fix this. If anybody has feedback on that, that's great. If anyone can test when this goes through, that's great too. I definitely want to get tests in, just so we make sure that we can document what's going on. Ideally, give people some context when we hit this issue. Anybody on this call? Has anyone hit this?
No.
Okay.
We were using Trusted
haven't seen-
Advisor, but we switched to service quotas.
Cool.
Yep.
So-
Same for us.
That's cool. Yeah, and that seems like I mean I know we had during our last meeting we had some discussions about deprecation notices and trying to give people some ideas, and that this is one of those things we could also kind of soft report on if we do some kind of a more verbose validation, is saying if you're using the service limit, account level check, then you might want to look at service quotas and maybe it'll cover you. So have either of you come across things that you were trying to do with service quotas and you had to fall back to the service limits filter, or no?
I don't think so.
Cool.
Yeah. Look at that policy briefly that we have.
Cool. That's good. So yeah, I mean, that seems like a reasonable thing for us to do, is try to push people to it, and then also like separately, gracefully handle this thing, this issue that we just expect to come up sometimes. And I see Kapil in the chat. We have had a bunch of custodian activities from Tim Penne, and maintainership seems like a good idea. Anyone have thoughts on Trusted Advisor or Tim? Put your up thumbs, Tim. All right. Well, that was kind of, oh, good. Thanks for dropping into Slack. That's a bunch of the high-level topics that just came up from just from some of the recurring issue activity and Slack discussion. Anyone else on the call have other issues to bring up, specific issues or PRs, or more general topics?
I just had a quick
we had a lot of, like, I'm looking at those stats, and we had a lot of Azure PRs drop in the past week or so. I also personally have been moving, so currently living out of boxes still. But one of the things that came up I discussed with the person who was distributing those is that they're unfortunately conflicting on the poetry lock file for Azure, because they're all doing slight modifications. So in a discussion with that person earlier today, I suggested that instead, like, so there's a bunch of approved PRs, especially we can't merge, and instead to move all the Azure poetry lock by project toml changes to single PRs, and that way the individual PRs don't have to deal with those conflicts.
That makes sense. I have seen a couple. I may have approved some of the ones you're talking about. I know we're still working through some Defender stuff. So yeah, good call. Stephen, I think you just had one too. You were going to mention something.
Yeah, just kind of a general question. I've seen this happen before. So when we with some policies, we'll notice that there can be like missing attributes for like certain resources. And I think what it comes down to is maybe earlier versions of Bodo have, may be missing attributes as opposed to like later versions. I encountered this kind of recently with this glue PR that got merged in. But including it like the the packages argument and then doing Bodo core and Bodo 3 seem to resolve that issue. So like when we do that, does that package the latest version of Bodo 3 and Bodo core? Is that
it packages what's on the OS? So it's run differently by provider. Like effectively for AWS, for when we provision a Lambda policy, we effectively assemble the Lambda archive client side. You can also specify, if you want to assemble a Lambda layer yourself, you can also specify that across your policies, and then that will be used. So you don't have to, because it does add time to execute the Lambda policies. If you have like a lot of new policies, let's say, and you're not necessarily updating, that can take some additional time. The default Lambda Bodo version is, generally speaking, like let's say wildly out of date by, let's say, 6 months. And if you do specify the Bodo package, what it does is that it takes whatever's installed on the client that's executing the policy and does the upload with that.
Okay, so if we're, say, deploying a Lambda, right now we're using like 3.9, I believe, is what it uses. And then the OS uses, say like Bodo 3, 1.26.9, Bodo Core, there's a certain version. So when we specify packages, you're saying then it uses that kind of default SDK that's tied to, say, like Lambda Python 3.9?
No. So
okay.
if you don't specify, you get the default that's in Lambda. If you do
Got
specify,
it.
then you get the CLI that's executing. That's the version you get.
I see. Okay. So whatever is installed, sorry, so like whatever is installed locally then, like when you go
Correct.
to, huh,
So if you specify package Bodo 3 and Bodo Core, by the way, you also Bodo Core is the most important part of that. You need both. Then you'll get whatever's installed locally and when you go to create a Lambda policy. Like I said, this also varies by provider. For GCP, like it's all server side directly from PyPy, so that's a little different. And then, yeah.
so if you don't have anything installed locally, because I mean, I use virtual environments and
Can't run Custodian without it locally, so.
okay,
Yeah,
so
like Bodo 3 and Bodo Core are dependencies of Custodian. So whatever Python environment you're using to run Custodian will have some version of Bodo 3 and Bodo Core in it.
okay.
And that's when
Because
we'll get packaged.
basically when I was running the tests, like I wasn't hitting the error. So it seems like the tests are using a different version of Bodo 3 and Bodo Core than whatever gets, whatever's associated with Python 3.9 lambdas.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, you could try to replicate it if you had your test environment. You could try to like force into your local dev environment, force these the default Python 3.9 versions. So you could like force these in there, and I would expect you to see that that error get replicated. But yeah, that's.
Okay.
I mean, I was just thinking about this kind of thing again because we got a request to add the ability to disable AMIs. And that's going to be another one of those things where we have to add the support on the custodian side, but it's also kind of tied to a Bodo Core version because otherwise you're not going to be able to have that method available or see the be able to filter. Like none of that stuff's going to be there.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for the clarification on that. Basically, it's going to fall back to your local environment when you specify those packages. So if you're running a super outdated thing locally, it's going to deploy super outdated Bodo.
Yes, but effectively every version of Custodian pins the version. So if you install, like, I think for the last year and a half, like part of this is also enable repeatable installs and downgrading with confidence, like over time. When we publish Custodian packages in the PyPy, they're published with a frozen version graph. So a particular version of Custodian depends on a particular version of Bodo, and that typically will force the update for them, even if they're not explicitly specified.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. That is a good question. It gets a little squirrely sometimes, but yeah, it's good that we just update these things. All right. Other topics, issues, PRs, concerns, or joys. I don't know. All right. I don't think we did celebrate 400 plus contributors. I've been saying every time I see a new PR come in from like first time contributor, it always makes me happy. And 400 is happy too. So that's good stuff. I don't know how to celebrate it other than just saying thanks to everybody. People on this call, people not on this call. It's pretty awesome. But we can also celebrate by giving you all some time back to your days if we don't have any other custodian topics. So, all right then. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Welcome to Tamim. I see what looks like a new name in the meeting. I'm not going to put you on the spot to intro, but hello and welcome.
Okay, thank you. I have a quick question. So, with respect to the OCI provider, do you have any specific requirements coming through?
Were you talking about OCI, you said?
Mm-hmm.
And specific requirements. I mean, other than the whatever the OCI provider package, I don't know.
Okay.
Kapil, do you have anything? Do you know of anything other than whatever the whatever like installing C7 and OCI should bring in any dependent provider packages, right?
Correct. Sorry, what
Okay.
was the question? I missed it initially.
Sounded like the question was around OCI, if there were any requirements for using that.
If you do pip install C7n_OCI, that should take care of dependency installation as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. We haven't had that many people coming in. It's a pretty new provider. So if you have any questions about using it or you run into any issues along the way, definitely come to Slack and let us know and we can troubleshoot.
Yeah, there is a dedicated provider OCI channel. We don't have them for others, but that was in collaboration with the provider themselves. So, and decided to take advantage of Slack's capability for separate rooms. So, just be aware that there is a public channel for that.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right. Thanks, everyone. I think that wraps up for today. We'll catch you all in Slack and see you at the next meeting.
Thank you.